Welcome to the MSU Deer Labs online seminar series brought to you by the Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. My name is Bronson Strickland. I will be your presenter today, and I'm the St. John Family Professor of Wildlife Management and co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Let's review some selective harvest programs. At least this is what Steve and I see as the programs, or an attempt at a program that usually falls into these two categories. Number one is a program to improve genetics, and number two is a program to improve the standing crop of bucks. Hopefully I'm going to convince you with the next few slides that the first category, harvest program to improve genetics, will not work. I'll say it again. It will not work in a free-ranging deer population. By free range, I mean this is a population that is free to roam. It is not fenced. It is not confined. And in that case, a harvest program to improve genetics is not going to work. So here's what I mean. Here would be a program, and in this case, this is not a selective harvest program, but many people think that making harvest decisions in a free-ranging deer herd is going to improve genetics, and it simply does not work. We see pictures like this. This is organization. I have the web link at the bottom there. And this is the power of genetics. So please don't mistake me when I say that a selective harvest program to improve genetics is not going to work. I'm not saying that genetics can't be manipulated, because obviously, as you see here, they can. A selective breeding program could be used to produce deer like this. This buck appears to be 4 years of age. Absolutely amazing what can be accomplished. But this is not going to be the result of any type of selective harvest program in a free-ranging deer herd. I'm going to work through an example here. This study was conducted by some colleagues of mine and Steve's with the Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they did a study for 8 different years using selection. So in other words, this was not like artificial insemination or some type of study like that. This was basically taking the best bucks and the best does and breeding them together, and doing that again and again and again for 8 years in a row. And they examined only the yearling age class. So they wanted to see, can they improve yearling antler size? In this case, points is one of the metrics they used. Can they improve that over the years by taking the yearling bucks with the greatest number of points and breeding it to does that are offspring, or the daughters of bucks that had a greater number of points? And again, did this for 8 years in a row, and in doing so, they almost doubled the yearling antler points from 4 to 7. So again, as you saw on the previous slide, yeah, genetic manipulation does work. In this case here, in deer pens in Texas with their program, when they're able to monitor which bucks are breeding or which bucks can breed, then you can make progress in that regard. Let me now compare that to a free-range scenario. This was a study, and this was a simulation study we did at the MSU Deer Lab. Stephen Webb was the student at the time, and he developed a fantastic program that we were able to run and evaluate selective harvest in a free-ranging scenario. So he borrowed genetics models from livestock industry. They have that down pat in terms of all of the the models and the paradigms they have to determine genetics and genetic quality in those cattle herds. So he worked with some experts there to alter and refine those models so that they would resemble that of whitetail deer. And we ran these models for 20 years. So starting your program, you start this selection program where we're removing, these lower quality bucks, the bucks with smaller antlers, with the hopes that if we keep removing these smaller antlered bucks year after year, we're going to make, quote, genetic progress. And what we found after running these models again and again and again for 20 years, that antler points only increased by 1/10 of a point in some situations, up to 9/10 of a point in other situations. So we never, in a free-ranging population, we were not even able to increase the average antler points by a single point after 20 years of selection. So you may ask, what went wrong? Why can't we do this in a free-range population? Well, let's start with who's doing the breeding. Can you even select the best mother? So 50% of a buck's genetics are coming from father, 50% coming from the mother. In a confined population in a deer pen, they are able to determine the female, the mother's genetics, and determine does she produce high quality male offspring or not. And so they're able to pick those mothers to breed with the fathers, the sires, that also have the largest antlers. So they're able to manipulate both sides of that genetic equation. They know father has good genetics. They also know mother has good genetics. We cannot do that in the wild. There's no indicator whatsoever looking at the phenotype of a doe and determining if she's going to have a son that's going to have larger antlers, medium antlers, or smaller antlers. So that's the first thing there. Also, in a free-range scenario in the wild, all bucks breed. Compare that back, like in our previous slide. In those controlled environments, the researcher or the manager, they are choosing which bucks breed. They know the bucks with the largest antlers, they are allowed to breed a particular doe or does with correspondingly good genetics. In the wild, that is not the case. All bucks are breeding. It doesn't matter if they have above average antlers, if they have below average antlers, if they're a yearling, if they are a 7-year-old buck. Believe it or not, maybe not every single yearling buck, but a lot of them are going to breed. So that is also influencing the results. All bucks breed. Think also about the environment. In those previous pen studies, the environment is controlled, meaning they are given high quality food, all they want to eat, all the time. That is not going to be the case in a free range scenario in the wild. So we have years where the mast crop or the acorn crop is good. We have years where crops are good. We have years where crops have failed. We have drought years. We have flood years, et cetera, et cetera. So the very characteristic that a hunter would be using to determine if a buck should be culled or harvested or not for the sake of genetics is being influenced by the environment. So literally from one year to the next, you might have a buck that in a good year displays antlers where you say, okay, I want to let him live. He obviously has good genetics. Put that same buck, though, in a situation where it's a bad year, like I say, a mast failure, big swing in temperature, either drought or blizzard or something like that. And now you have affected his antlers such that you think he is of lower genetic quality and you've culled him. So that's another variable you just cannot control for in the wild, and why we don't see any results when we try to have a selective harvest program for genetics in the wild. Also, a big one here, lastly, dispersal. We have this constant exchange of genetics, yearling buck dispersal. So on the average, you're going to have about 70% of your yearling bucks are going to be moving off of your property. And by association, you're going to have all these other yearling bucks on surrounding properties coming into your property. So even if you could control, the things in the list there above, and you could produce a yearling buck that was, quote, genetically better or genetically superior, 70% of them are walking off of your property and going somewhere else. So all that, quote, genetic progress that you thought you made, it just left your property and it's on your neighbor's property. So all these reasons combined just clearly show that you're never going to make any progress at all trying to remove spikes, to make progress, or removing, any buck that has less than 8 points. We're going to remove it. We're culling them out of the deer herd. It's not doing anything whatsoever to improve genetics on your property. So to wrap this up, you can see, are genetics important? They absolutely are important. Genetics is why you see this fella here reportedly at 2 years of age with a rack like that. That is genetics and also nutrition. Of course, you couldn't have that rack if he didn't have good nutrition. But even if you have good nutrition, you're not going to have a rack like that unless you have the genetics for it. Are genetics important? Yes, they are. Are genetics important in a free-ranging deer herd? Yes, they are. Genetics are going to impact the average antler size of individuals in the population. So a free-ranging buck that scores 170 inches, yeah, his genetics are there to grow 170 inches worth of antler. So genetics are important in these free-ranging herds too, but you can't do anything about it. That's the point. In this confined population like you're seeing, you can do something about it. You can control for it. In the wild, you cannot control for it. So don't think when you're making a harvest decision, I did some good by taking this buck out of the gene pool. I hear it all the time. I did such a good thing by removing this buck out of the gene pool, and he's not going to breed a doe and have these bad. No, that is absolute nonsense. It's not going to do anything whatsoever to improve the genetics of the population on the deer herd that you manage.